Let's get to a developing story now at the U.S.-Mexico border. The significant market disruption we could see if President Trump follows through on a threat to shut down that border. Today, the president saying he is taking a wait-and-see approach, but says, quote, we're ready to close it if Mexico doesn't do more to stem the tide of migrants trying to cross into the United States. Eamon Javers live at the White House with the very latest. Eamon.
Yeah, Melissa, the president also said today that he values security over trade, so he's willing to close the border. Not clear whether he's actually going to follow through on this potential threat here, but what is clear is we're having a little bit of a dispute opened up here this afternoon between the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and Larry Kudlow, the National Economic Council Director here at the White House. Kudlow earlier today, we'll start with his comment. He talked to Sarah Eisen of CNBC after a U.S. Chamber of Commerce event, and he suggested that there might be a way for the administration to look for a workaround if the president does close the border with Mexico, finding some way for commerce to carry on even as the border was sealed. Here's what Larry Kudlow said.
We're watching it and looking for ways to allow the freight passage. Some people call it truck roads. And there are ways you can do that, which would ameliorate the breakdown in supply chains.
But U.S. Chamber of Commerce officials held a conference call this afternoon. They say they're not in love with that idea. They suggest there's still negative economic consequences, even if that is tried. Anything that allowed goods to traverse the border but not people and workforce could have a problem. They say there are serious questions about just how such a proposal would even be implemented in the first place. And they pointed to an interesting statistic of the last time there was a slowdown at the border after 9/11. President Bush ordered intensive security on the Mexican-U.S. border. And at that time, U.S. Chamber of Commerce officials say that by September 13th, Daimler Chrysler was already announcing one of its plants in the U.S. would close for lack of parts. So they're saying that there's a very quick turnaround time here with these parts coming in and the supply chain being as quick as it is these days, that you can see an effect within days inside the United States of any closure at the border.
It did sound, Eamon, from the president today at that pool spray when he was meeting with the NATO Secretary General that he may be just sort of jawboning, threatening the closure of the border in order to force Mexico to be tougher on the flow of migrants, which he says it has been.
That's a pretty good guess, right? I mean, this is a president who likes to jawbone, and he likes to look for leverage points that he has in any negotiation. And a lot of foreign policy to this president is a negotiation. He's looking for a better deal, he says. And I think if you look at those comments, there was this moment where the president said the Mexicans are doing much better in terms of apprehending migrants who are coming to the United States. That seems to leave the president a little bit of an out, right? I mean, he could say, look, the Mexican government has done really well this week, and therefore we're not moving ahead with this. But at the same time, he's saying he's willing to 100% close the border, and he prioritizes security over trade. So, you know, pick your tea leaf there, which one you want to read.
Yep. Eamon, thank you. Eamon Javers at the White House. Now, some of the stocks with the most revenue exposure to Mexico include names like Alaska Air, American Tower, Pepsi, Norfolk Southern. So how should you trade these stocks? And it was telling to see some of these stocks and how they reacted in the markets in the past couple days. Kansas City Southern was the first one that I went to. It saw the biggest impact, or had an outsized impact, when there were threats that NAFTA would be torn up. Kansas City Southern gets about 30% of its revenues from goods crossing the U.S.-Mexico border. And the stock is up on the past 2 days. It's down about 1% in today's session. So
it's interesting. Down, to your point, 0.8% today. I mean, this is a stock that I'm not saying people panic, but at the height of all this rhetoric, I mean, here's a stock that traded down to $85 and traded at valuations that probably, I won't say it will never see again, but it hadn't probably seen in their history. With that said, now's the point where people probably should be selling this stock because, quite frankly, we're up against levels we saw in September and we're coming into an earnings release. So I think you have an opportunity to be taking profits in these names ahead of rhetoric that could actually intensify.
Yeah, I look at the Mexican peso, too. I look at the cross of the Mexican U.S. dollar, and at 19.25 roughly. I mean, we've been very range-bound. If anything, to me, I think there's still a lot of negative news priced into this. Between much of the move, if you want to get really into your FX kind of strategy, though, it was related to what happened to oil. And Mexico hasn't taken a lot of that back since oil recovered. I think it's a good trade.
I agree with him. The rhetoric is, first of all, it's a ridiculous policy, right? And I think he is giving himself an out. He judges himself by the stock market. If we were to see this kind of thing happen, right, to have no real no real time to even try to adjust your supply chain. It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd. So I think it trading off a lot, if anything trades off a lot, it's an opportunity to buy, because I just absolutely can't see. Even Mitch McConnell is coming out saying, you know,
it'd be catastrophic.
Catastrophic, right? So, and them trying to find a way around their own policy. I mean, Larry's talking about, you know, trying to find a way around that policy. It's ridiculous.
Well, so you could have said the same thing in November and December about a government shutdown, and Mitch McConnell was saying the same.
I don't agree. No. We've seen many, many government shutdowns.
Well, okay, Karen, but what I'm saying is, it's like if you think about what the potential adverse effects to our economic situation right here, they're pretty similar, okay? And they're things that logically don't make any sort of sense. And we can look back now to a few months ago and say that was actually a really stupid.
Wait, you think the government shutdown is equivalent to shutting down the entire U.S.-Mexico border?
Well, what I'm saying is it has the potential to actually, whatever momentum that these guys think that we have, you know what I mean? It has the potential to slow that momentum. It has the potential to shave off basis points from GDP. It has the potential to slow a lot of things down. Don't forget that USMCA thingamajiggy, not even ratified yet. You know, so it's a lot of rhetoric right now. But you would have thought that they would have, you know, considered all of that sort of stuff into the December 21st closure, and they still shut the government down for 35 days, and it still had an adverse effect on our economic growth here, and we're still recovering from it a little bit. So I think that, you know, I think you have to take them at their word, and it could be a real bad thing to happen mid-year this year.
Strategics is saying $1.2 billion of daily economic activity would grind to a halt should the border be closed. Then there's, on top of that, and you mentioned the passage of USMCA, which is not a foregone conclusion at all, there are potential auto tariffs, right, with Europe. I mean, there are a lot of other trade wars brewing, and what can all these things do collectively to economic growth?
Yeah, well, I agree. I don't think that the market's pricing in any of that. So let's be clear. The market is not even really staring down the barrel of auto tariffs. This is a market that's, you know, 2% off its all-time highs and really has taken back the concept that we don't believe this is going to happen, that it's jawboning. So, yes, if it does happen, I think there's a substantial impact.
Here's a conspiracy theory.
Oh, I
think Guy Adami will enjoy this. Interesting how Larry Kudlow is okay with a 50 basis point cut on the Fed to make sure that economic growth can continue in the face of all of these potential obstacles.
So I look at, but then today he backtracked. Didn't he say he was misquoted?
We're going to have to pull the tape and see what he actually said. I was sitting on set with Larry. We asked him about a 50 basis point cut.
So he's
paving the way for this.
Can I play dumb here? So you're basically saying that, let me connect the dots, that he's ready to do what it has to be done on the border, close it up, do what we have to do, and we've got the Fed behind us cutting 50 bips.
Maybe.
How's that?
Self-styled free trader.